Brothers and sisters, in East and West, we are prepared to forget about your double standards. If you will find yourselves the courage to demand the application of the principles of international law, not only in Africa and Asia, but also Europe. Let us unite our voices and demand that Hitler's solemn pacts, together with the secret protocols, be declared null and void from the very moment of their signing. Let us declare the annexation of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania unlawful. We are ready. We are arriving. With this, the Baltic nations held hands in order to protest what had happened 50 years prior. In 1939, the Soviet Union signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Germany that the Baltic states would be separated. 50 years later, millions of people from Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, three countries west of Russia, lined up while holding hands in order to protest against the Soviet Union's occupation. People thought the Soviet Union would retaliate, but never did thanks to Gorbachev's reform, Glasnost. 2 years later, the Soviet Union fell due to the Baltic states and other countries leaving the Union and declaring independence. This was a successful peaceful protest because it contributed to the disintegration of the Soviet Union. To understand this further, we must go back to the start, 80 years earlier. In 1919, the Baltic nations had established a strong independence. By the late 30s, they had developed a very robust economy, and their standard of living exceeded most of the rest of Europe. This caused the USSR to be greatly jealous. In 1939, just before World War II, the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact with Germany called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. They kept the secret to ensure no one would be mad at them and so they could keep a neutral status with everyone else. However, this plan failed. Everyone in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia all knew. Following World War II, the people of the Baltic states were oppressed by the Soviet Union and the Red Army. Not only that, but they were living without their own freedom. During the Russian occupation, people in Lithuania did not have democracy and freedom of speech. Due to this, everything was changing. History textbooks were being rewritten, and historical facts were being changed. Religious holidays and Christmas were celebrated in families, but it was officially banned. During this time under Soviet rule, no one was allowed to share their own country's flag. They were only allowed to show the Soviet Union's flag.
They kept the hidden Estonian flag during the Soviet times underneath the roof. So basically they had the roof and they had internal insulation. The flag was in there.
No one wasn't scared. Things were oppressive. If you simply broke the law, you'd be shot. People lived in fear because the occupation authorities persecuted the disobedient. This was a very sad point in time. For many kids during the Soviet occupation, they didn't even know what Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were. This was because they had no life out of Soviet rule.
But previously, people really don't talk much about that because, the kids tend to chatter. they tend to go around and speak things that they probably shouldn't be speaking. So the easiest way to control the kids is not to tell them what happened before. So it's for me, it was pretty awkward to learn that Estonia existed, or there was a country before. And I was close to 10 years old, and I start hearing the stories. It's your world, you think it's stable, starts to, it says that there's a different world, and you need to need to think of, need to figure out what to think about that. It was very awkward times. I remember that.
Shortly after, Mikhail Gorbachev came into power. He already served as part of the government, but now he was president. Being president, he established two reforms: Glasnost and Perestroika. Glasnost meaning openness, and Perestroika meaning reform. Glasnost meant the Baltic states could finally stand against the Union without Gorbachev coming after them. Openness and criticism are a way for the masses, for all of society, to control every process. With Glasnost in mind, the Baltic states could finally stand against this horrible thing they had been living through. On August 21st, 1989, a letter was sent from an anonymous person. The letter said they would stand against the Soviet Union. They mentioned how bad they are. August 23rd, 1939, inflicted wounds to tens of nations of states. Some of these wounds are still bleeding. They were horrible to them. The Baltic nations were going to stand against this. Let us declare the annexation of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania unlawful. We are ready. We are arriving. On August 23rd, 1989, 50 years after the pact and 2 days after the letter, Roughly 2 million people lined up while holding hands in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. From just babies to elderly women and men, they held hands. Many people sang songs and raised flags in order to protest. Helicopters flew over them, observing the things they did. Mikhail Gorbachev watched them as they protested. Many people thought this was a bad idea, but still did it. Like the other Baltic peoples, we Estonians have never forgotten our freedom. We are determined to regain our freedom so that our children can live in a free country. Some people thought that Gorbachev was going to go against it, completely ambush them. He didn't. He just sat back and watched. Even though some people were worried about Gorbachev, people were ecstatic with happiness. Everyone was delighted with joy, smiling, singing, and hugging each other regardless of one's national heritage. This burst of joy was simply contagious. Some people weren't allowed to attend this protest, but still participated. My parents did not consider it safe to take me along the mass gatherings on song ground. All I could do was stay home, listen to the radio. Not only did people raise flags, hold hands, and show posters, but they also sang songs. Due to this singing, the Baltic Way is also known today as the Singing Revolution. People all over the world heard about this protest and supported it. During this chaos, President George H.W. Bush was in contact with Gorbachev. They both wanted to establish a good relationship between the Soviet Union and the United States of America. So, President Bush said this.
And we have been quietly asserting to him for a long time that the best thing he could do in terms of relationships with the United States is to free the Baltic states.
This was to help the Baltics by putting pressure on the Soviet Union. 2 months after the event, Lithuania declared independence. People started taking down the Soviets' flags. In May of 1990, both Latvia and Estonia searched for independence, later gaining it on August 20th of 1991. Many different countries took down the Soviets' flags and claimed independence. On December 26, 1991, the last flag was lowered in Russia. This declared the disintegration of the Union once and for all. This, along with other protests and events like the Chernobyl disaster, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and many smaller protests in other countries, led to the fall of the USSR. Many people were not expecting this huge milestone to strike the Soviet Union so hard they'd be able to regain their freedom. This moment shows a huge turning point in history, because without this, many nations to this day may not have the freedom. This shows a huge representation of how completely different people, linked by one thing, can come together to go against something this horrible. Looking back from before the Baltic Way to after is a completely different story. Imagine not having any freedom and being completely shut down from your life to regaining your freedom and living a better life. The Soviet Union played a huge role in each and every individual's life in the Baltic states every single day. So getting rid of them was a huge milestone in their lives. I'd like to give recognition to every single individual who lived through these terrible times and took a stand for what they believed.